Anyway, while we're setting that up, I'm sure many of you guys are all thinking about AI safety since we're at a food safety conference. And one of the things that's been happening lately is we've got really large enterprises dropping AI products into the market with very little regulatory oversight. And so then we have products like GPT or ChatGPT, for example, being released, and people getting their hands onto this very early technology and using it for all sorts of use cases and purposes. This is kind of like similar to the pharmaceutical industry creating a drug and then putting it out there and letting the public experiment and just seeing the impacts of it. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of concern about, from an AI safety perspective, obviously there's implications for other industries like food safety if it's applied in that space. Recently, the Europeans released the AI Act, which has put a starting point to some of this oversight, including things like banning certain applications, things like using AI for nefarious use cases or social profiling, for example. So there's a lot of area in that work that's happening in that space, but it's an evolving piece of work. The other thing that's kind of happening at the moment is, now I did my PhD in bioengineering, and one of the things that kind of really annoyed me at the time was around just access to information. And it was really hard to find, every journal article was behind a paywall. It was very hard to get access to the raw data, to be able to replicate anything. And this is one thing that I think the AI community has done really well. Most AI journal access is open access, and usually they includes the source code and also the data sets for many people to then go on and test. So that's just a really positive side that I'm seeing. Great, I think my slides are up. Enough of storytelling. Anyway, this is what my AI assistant told me how I should be preparing for this talk today. Fun fact is that none of the people in this image is actually a real person. And this is just the awesomeness of how great these tools are becoming of building photorealistic humans. And so this has brought on a wave of disruption to a number of industries. So what's been really kind of, one question I kept getting asked is, where are we at today with AI? And why has it exploded in the last couple of years? And for me, there's been a couple of things that's kind of caused this. The first is technologically, there has been a couple of major shifts in the architecture of some of the AI models that we use. And that's allowed a lot of new applications. It's allowed us to pump a lot of data into these models, and it's allowed us to put a lot of money behind these models to go and create a lot of interesting use cases. To give you an idea around how much money has been spent into some of these things, ChatGPT, that was about $4.5 million to put in, to train the first, or GPT-3, one of the first use cases. And then the more recent one, GPT-4, that was about rumored to be over $100 million to build. So quite serious sums of capital have gone into these products. And what has been the impact of that? Well, if you look at certain use cases like detecting speech, it's now it's actually met and surpassed the human level of accuracy for transcription, transcribing, and also just documenting text in multiple languages as well. Similarly, around visual identification, so this is classification. Essentially, you take a photo of an object and you ask the AI, what is the object? In this case, it's a photo of a cat. And you see there was been quite a substantial improvement in AI over the last decade or so. And again, it's surpassed the human level. ChatGPT's model behind it, GPT-4, this is how it did when you put it into a lot of a university environment. It scored in the 90th percentile in the law bar exam. My wife is super jealous, she's a lawyer. And some of these scores are like in the SAT, the GRE, it's doing tremendously well in scoring reasoning, math as well. So now there seems to be like very little jobs or tasks that an AI can't do. And actually, these are some of the things that AI has already started at some point, even better than humans at performing. And I often joke with the people that I work with that the safest job in the future is probably going to be a plumber. Because anything that's a knowledge-based worker, anything that's to do with analyzing a lot of information, content, well, AI is really good at that kind of stuff. So, yeah, we should all become a plumber. Okay, so I want to go into some of the use cases around AI for the food safety in space. And I see there's three big opportunities that I feel. The first is around inspection. Two is around its ability to generate insights from massive amounts of data. And three is around the communication side. So in terms of inspection, so firstly, there's been a lot of work that's gone into visual inspection. This is a piece of work that we've been working with the Meat Industry Association around using photos from cameras, a pretty standard RGB camera, to be able to visually identify pieces of meat on the conveyor belt. That has obviously applications around quality control, identifying defects, sorting, verification, counting, so a number of follow-on applications from that. As Swati already mentioned around classifying bacteria, and there's been a lot of work in this space of using AI to visually classify and identify microcolonies of bacteria after only 3 hours of growth. And what's really cool about this is the type of software that you can package together and you could deploy across a number of sites without needing a subject matter expert, all of the know-how that a human would bring. But essentially, you could package that together into a piece of algorithm. Another area around AI and food safety is around its ability to predict things. So here's a use case around predicting food spoilage. And it does this by combining not only the machine learning, the algorithm side, but it brings together data from a number of IoT sensors, things like humidity, volatile organic compounds, the temperature, obviously. But when you think about the predictive power of AI and the data that you can feed it, well, then you start talking about predicting adverse weather effects. You're starting to talk about predicting disease outbreaks. You're talking about using all that power to be able to identify anomalies, patterns, and that's traditionally quite difficult from a human standpoint. But perhaps one of my favorite use cases of AI is around in the communication side. I chat with ChatGPT all the time. My wife probably gets jealous that I talk to it more than I talk to her. But what's really cool is just the ability to deploy such a assistant or a bot across a number of channels. And one of the things that I'm finding a lot in some of the other AI applications we're working on is timely access to information is a huge thing. Being able to answer questions at any time, in any language, across whether it's on my phone or if I'm cooking and it's on my smart speaker, I can ask a question. Then that prevents the need for guessing, and it just gives me a more informed answer. And of course, one of the areas that is going in a lot of work, and Brett's talked a lot about this, is misinformation, disinformation, and there's been a lot of work around going into these AI models to essentially bring your own data. So a lot of enterprises, businesses are bringing their own subject matter expertise or data on top of a large language model, and so here is an example of, I put in the Food Act. It was a very, very long act. So I put that on top of ChatGPT, and then that allows you to ask quite specific questions related to the Food Act. For example, what classification was a beer, and that's level 3, was a highlighted answer. So this is one of the techniques that's been used a lot in terms of AI veracity. And of course, there are other guardrail mechanisms as well. So I just want to spend a bit of time around talking about the AI adoption journey. For us, it's a 10-year process for us, and we've seen a lot of businesses, industries doing it wrong, poorly. Others have done it really well. And there's a framework called the AI Ladder Framework, and essentially details around your first step around at the bottom is to make sure you collect data, then you have to organize it, then you go into analyze, and then you finally infuse the insights and AI across your entire organization. And this is probably the first thing that I'm seeing wrong in a lot of businesses is that they're siloing AI into one part of the business. It's typically the technology or the IT side of the business. But that's a shame because AI works really well when it's got access to your operational data, your sales, your marketing data, and that's where it's able to do a lot of the great work. So not siloing AI is a really awesome thing that I'm seeing. Second is creating a data strategy. The other day I was talking to a company that was planning to deliver insights in a particular report. And one of the things we talked about was what kind of data do you need to collect now so that when you do build this, that you will have the right training data for it. And AI companies know this really well. There's a framework they call the AI cycle, and essentially works like this. You start by collecting some data, which helps you build a product. That product will end up being better than other products, which will give you more users or customers. Then that gives you more data to create an even better product. And so AI companies, like all the social media companies, the search engines, this is essentially how they create monopolies. Another thing that I'm seeing a lot is around when a business or organization enters the AI journey is they tend to often go for the biggest, hairiest problem to solve. And it makes sense from a commercial perspective that you want a good return on your investment, but often those problems are typically technically the hardest challenges, the most expensive, and they're the ones that have regulatory or legal considerations you have to worry about. So the way that I've seen a lot of businesses enter into the AI space is start with something simple. Start with something that's more likely to be a win, get rungs on the board, and quite often those small things may just be a chatbot on your website. It could be an internal-facing chatbot that's only usable by staff members as well. So there's ways to minimize your exposure to AI as an organization starts that journey. Another really important thing is to test edge cases. This is one of the first models of Tesla. They had a problem where people found that if you stuck some or if you stuck some squares over the stop sign, it would confuse the algorithm thinking that it was a speed limit sign. So of course that was a major problem for Tesla, and they had to fix that bug really quickly. This was Foodstuffs recently put out a meal maker, and they've actually done a really good job on this. Has anybody used this yet? It's essentially you put in items that are left in your fridge or in your pantry, and it will go create a meal for you, and it's pretty good. But in the early days, when we were testing it, we found that there were quite a few bugs, and you could put ingredients in your meals like bleach or all sorts of unsafe products, and it'll make up an interesting meal for you. But they've done a really good job since getting rid of all of that and really putting guardrails around safety of using this. And finally, I'd just like to encourage everybody to think of AI as a long-term investment. I take the example of a driving car. I don't expect my 2.5-year-old girl to be able to drive me around anytime soon. It's going to take a lot of time, training, effort, investment. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Questions? Dan? Oh, yes. Thank you for your
technologies, whether there's going to be a time where we lose our ability to use our senses because we're relying on our exterior parts of our human anatomy that we tend we go it up. It's not on. It's all right. I hope the voice hope you can hear me all right. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, Squire, whether the AI will diminish our ability to naturally use our natural senses that we've been gifted at birth.
It is definitely, you know, when I think about technology and then us taking technology for granted and then forgetting about all the things around it, we have people in our business that do not know how to read a map or do not know how to navigate. And if a bus dropped them somewhere and they didn't have their phone, they would not be able to get home. And so I do worry about that, but I also feel that evolution has taken a long time to get us where we are in terms of our senses, so I have full confidence that we will be able to pick up those skills or still be able to call on them as required.
Just one example, I play golf, and I play with people that use a measuring device, but I can just look and say, oh, I can work out how far it is without having to use the measuring device. But it makes me wonder why they do that. Only on Tuesday.
We have a question from Rob.
Yeah, I was thinking back to the talk that Kathy Glass gave about the Listeria tool that she built on the web to help artisan cheesemakers decide time and temperature. And the building of that tool required very careful examination, not just of the data, but the experimental conditions used to create that data. Now, is that something that AI can reproduce, or does that still need the depth of experience that a human would have?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most of the AI applications or has required on a human in the loop, and at least in the training phase, and so that has required on a person skilled in the art to be able to pull apart the data, annotate it, classify it, so it's borrowing from that knowledge. There is a set of AI that is around unsupervised learning that does not require that, but most of the work that, at least in the real world setting, has been trained from experts having an important part in that process. Whether in the future that's required going forward, or I'm not sure. It's when that transition will happen, if it will ever happen.
Question over here. One of the things we had at the misinformation and disinformation lecture, of course, is that there tends to be more misinformation than there's facts out there nowadays. One of the things with AI quite often, will it use majority votes on information it will find? I mean, humans have the capability of saying, well, I know there's more of this, but I'll ignore that because it's clearly rubbish. AI, will that have the capability of actually distinguishing between the rubbish and the non-rubbish, especially if there's more rubbish than there's non-rubbish?
Well, when I go onto the internet or social media these days, you can hardly there's so much junk out there, right? And it's interesting that now there are AI that's used to create the content, but there are also bots who are there designed to consume the content. And so you have these cycles where you have AI creating content for an AI audience, trying to milk the algorithms. But whether it's from a human perspective or humanness, whether I'm interested in reading something, whether I can believe the veracity of something, I think that still needs a lot of work.
Because we see the same thing when we do genome annotations. At some point somebody makes a wrong mistake, and that somehow seems to be amplifying itself in the system, and at some point the bad calls outnumber the good calls, and then every automated system will take on the bad calls, making it even worse. And I see that, and I can't change it because it's not my system to play with.
Yes, fair enough. I hope this may be just a numbers game where the regression to the mean will help us discover the truth. But yeah.
Okay, well, I think we better call it
You just
quits
got one
there.
from...
No, one more? One more, okay.
Thanks, Dan. I think I must be getting old because I find that a little bit scary. I'm still trying to get my son to make sure he's doing his handwriting rather than doing everything on his iPad. But I guess one thing that's really topical in New Zealand at the moment is conversations around data sovereignty, in particularly Indigenous and Māori data sovereignty. Have you got any comments on where you see that fitting with some of the new AI technologies?
There's definitely a push towards the data sovereignty, and I'm seeing that. And in industry as well, we have customers who tell us that we don't want our data leaving our shores. We want them in specific centers. We want it, either we want to have them on-prem or here. So that is a growing part, and I'm seeing a lot of that. I think industry is responding to that. So you know, Microsoft's building their data center here. AWS have one already. But the ultimate question will still be whether individuals have sovereignty over their data rather than the organizations have access to their data. And that's probably less of an AI space, but I know there are lots of solutions in the Web3 community that they're building that as part of the solution there. Yeah, I think it will involve a whole economy of what ownership looks like.
Thank you, Dan. I think we should call it to an end.
Perfect.
Fantastic, great,
All right.
thank you.
Thanks, man.